Hi, how are you? I'm Vincent Quinones, principal here at Memorial High School.
Hi, nice to meet you. Ashley.
Nice to meet you, Ashley.
Right. Oh, and then I brought my resume. I don't know if you had a copy of it.
Oh, perfect. This will be very useful. Thank you so much. So, first of all, let me just say thank you so much for coming in. Thank you for filling out the whole application process here for Spring Branch ISD. We were able to look through it. Everything looks great. Today we just want to kind of interview you. I'm going to ask you some series of questions.
Okay.
Just answer to the best of your ability, and we'll kind of we'll go through that, and then I'll give you some time to maybe ask me questions, and then we can kind of talk about kind of the steps moving forward. So,
okay, perfect.
Is that all right with you?
Yeah.
Perfect.
Sounds great.
All right. So, first thing, Ms. Abrams, can you tell us about your background, previous experience, training, etc.?
Sure. So I graduated from Texas State University in May of 2016. What I kind of did there was, my major was communication disorders. So that's like speech and language pathology. So that's kind of what I started out in.
Okay.
I kind of went through that. I've always worked with kids growing up, babysitting and tutoring and stuff like that. So I knew I wanted to do some kind of helping profession. So that's kind of what led me into that path. I thought about teaching, I thought about being a counselor. I just knew I wanted to help kids somehow. And I kind of stumbled on speech and language. I loved English and I loved science.
Yeah.
That's pretty much how I got there. Took a few introduction classes and I really liked it. So that was what my undergrad was in. After my bachelor's, I started working in a speech and language clinic. I was an SLP assistant, so I saw kids, special needs kids, like 1 year old up until, I think my oldest was 17. So I worked on them with creating goals. I wasn't able to evaluate as an assistant, so meaning doing any testing with that. But I was able to follow treatment plans, write progress reports, those kind of things, and kind of assess progress as we went. So I did that for about 2 years, and then I kind of just had gaps in my schedule, so that's when I discovered substitute teaching.
Okay.
So that's kind of was my first step into the education world.
Okay.
So I started substitute teaching through KDISD, and I just loved it. I mean, I loved interacting with the kids, more just than one-on-one, which is what I was used to. So I got to interact with a whole classroom full of kids. I love that I got to interact with the staff. As a speech therapist, I didn't get to really talk with other professionals. It was just me and one child all day, every day. So I really like that interaction with the staff and just with a bunch of different kids at one time in a group setting. So I really started enjoying that, and that's when they offered me, I was kind of doing a long-term sub position, so they offered me a position in life skills as a para. So then I took that and I just loved it. I mean, the kids were great. Like I said, I loved working in the school and starting to learn things from an education standpoint. So it was really nice because I kind of had that speech background, which is it's a lot like education. It's a lot of working with kids, meeting them where they're at, and kind of developing based on their skills. I mean, it was more. I mean, speech is not. It's more than just talking. It's cognition and communication. It's written language. It's using all of that. So I did that for a year, and like I said, I fell in love with it. So that kind of took me into the path of an alternative certification. So I did get my alternative certification through Texas Teachers, and I was hired on at that same school out in KDISD as a in-class support special ed teacher.
Okay.
So kind of what that looked like, I had about 19 kids on our caseload, and that ranged, I was pretty much in charge of kindergarten, second grade, and third grade. My kids were within those grades on my caseload. So that looked like anything from kids with high functioning autism, ADHD, emotional disturbance, dyslexia, kids that just kind of have that learning gap and learning disabilities, reading disabilities, those kind of things.
Okay.
So that's what I've done most recently was, my alternative certification and then my first year at Stanley as a special education teacher.
Awesome.
Yeah.
That's great to hear. It seems like you worked with a lot of different age groups, kind of different skill levels, and different I guess areas within kind of the special ed umbrella, which is obviously this is what we're interviewing for, is for one of the co-teach here for the special ed.
Awesome.
So I know you've kind of worked mostly with younger kids, elementary kids. So why would you like to transition to the high school level?
Yeah, so I loved working on the foundational level with kids and things like that. I did get to see a few kids in high school when I was doing the whole speech thing and at the clinic, and I thought that was really cool because it kind of pushed me as a professional. I work so naturally with younger kids, and I just kind of have that knack for that, and I think I really enjoyed working with the older kids because it kind of got me to think out of the box. It wasn't so much of the routine, because by the time they're in high school, they're taking all these different avenues based on their disability or their weaknesses. So what I really liked about that is the few kids that I did see that were in high school was we were preparing for like the workforce, and we were preparing transitions outside of high school, which I really, really enjoyed. I loved getting to work with the parents on that, to see what path they're wanting their kids to take, because it's hard for parents. It's hard for parents when they first find out about limitations that their kids may have, and first accepting that. And I've worked a lot with that, initial diagnosis and those kind of things. So I think it would be really cool to gain more experience and knowledge on the opposite end. It's we've gone through this whole childhood, and now they're an adult, and it's kind of like they're transitioning all over again. We've worked this whole time up until this point, and now it's we've got to transition out of this phase into something else. So that's kind of
So that's great to hear, because one of here in Spring Branch ISD, one of our biggest goals, or kind of our mission, is what we call T24, which is technical, military, 2-year associates, 4-year degrees. So what that means is, we don't just want to get kids to graduate high school.
Right.
We want them to go into some sort of trade school. We want them to go into the military, into a 2-year associates, into a 4-year university. And not just to get them there, but we want them to succeed and get that degree or certification, whatever it may be. So from what you just kind of mentioned about that transition, it sounds like you would definitely align with that T24 philosophy that we have here in Spring Branch. So if you work here in Spring Branch ISD, you're going to hear a ton of that T24, and that's just our goal of getting kids some sort of certification post high school. We don't just want to, like I said, we just don't want them to graduate high school. We want them to be successful after and continue on their education. So
awesome.
That's great to hear. Now, here at Memorial High School, we have a lot of, we're very competitive here at Memorial High School. It's a very competitive school. There's a lot of pressures with our classes. We're very, we're demanding in a good way, I believe, to push the students to pass their limits and see what they can do academically in the classroom, and what they can kind of push outside the classroom as well.
Right.
With that comes some pressures, and there's some students who may lack, might fall through a little bit. And so I guess my next question for you would be, how would you handle a student that's consistently failing your class? And I know you'll be, so we're interviewing for a co-teach. So consistently failing your class, and what steps would you take to help the student to be more successful?
Right. I think for this question, at least in my experience so far, is whenever we see kids failing or just still not catching up to where they should be with the supports they have in place, that's telling me that these supports aren't working, they're either not working, they're not enough, maybe we're over supporting them. So what that tells me is that we need to come back, to an IEP meeting and kind of evaluate how we're going to get them caught up to where they could be with those supports. Because, within the modifications and accommodations they have, that's why they're in place, is because they qualify for these things, and these things should get them to be where they are successful. So I think that what that would look like on my standpoint would be talking with their teachers, talking with the people that know them throughout the school, and even talking with the student themselves and saying, where are we having trouble? Where's the breakdown happening? And just figuring that out between, those sets of people. And if it's a situation where we have to add, take away, move around some accommodations or modifications, then we would have to go back to an IEP meeting for that. And that would be, contacting you, contacting the parents, and re-meeting to kind of figure that out, which is great. And, even if there's any, say the student's going to intervention, like talking to those people and seeing, like, are you seeing these kinds of trends in their progress too?
So that kind of just leads me into a next question. So you mentioned while talking about working with students, which I think you've got a great layout of how you would handle certain situations. Here at Memorial High School, we're very fortunate that we have a lot of parent support, a lot of parent involvement. We have many of our parents working with our PTA, booster clubs. They're very involved in their child's learning. So you talked about talking with the parents about the students' progress. Can you just kind of expand on that a little bit, on how you do that? Like, when do you feel that it's necessary to talk to the parents? Is it only when the child is doing poorly in class? Are there other opportunities that you do to interact with parents?
Yeah, for the most part, I'm very open with the parents. It's a little different, I think, in elementary school because it's still new. They're still so young, and the parents want a lot of that support. I don't know if that would change in high school. It might, just because I haven't worked within that setting. But for the most part, in my previous job, I've been very open with the parents, and I give them, pretty frequent updates on both positive and negative. Like, I don't want to just be the bearer of bad news all the time.
Yeah.
If something's going wrong, and hey, we're seeing this problem. So I love to share success stories with parents, and I think that's important too, especially with kids, who need that extra support. It's uplifting not for the parents only, but for the students too. To say, hey, I got recognized because I'm actually doing my best and doing what I can do. So
and I think that's like kind of the stigma is if parents get a phone call or an email from either administration or teacher, they always assume it's bad. Like, what did my child do wrong? And that's something that we're trying to change. Like, we're not only trying to contact the parents when the parent or when the student is struggling, but when they are succeeding or when they're kind of going beyond the expectations.
Right.
So that's one thing that we want to continue to promote. Is we want to we do need to let the parents know when students are failing and try to find ways that we can get them to be more successful. But also kind of sharing those successes as well. So
yeah, absolutely.
All right. So what teaching strategies have you used that you believe promotes student success?
Teaching strategies. So using different types of technology for sure. Like, at least at the elementary level, you know, we use a lot with our smart boards, our interactive boards, and incorporating that technology just to keep them engaged
Right.
is great, and those kinds of things. I mean, it's a little different for co-teach because I do a lot of small group one-on-one work. So you know, I'm always checking in with them to see like how they're doing. I always try to incorporate old and new information when I do pull them in small groups or things like that. So just to keep their mind fresh on kind of what they've been learning, because if there's a concept that I knew they struggled on, you know, in the last 9 weeks, I'll kind of revisit that and retouch on that when I pull them for small groups, or kind of one-on-one work, to just build on what they've been doing and just constantly checking in on them.
Okay. When you say old new information, can you just kind of expand on that just a little bit?
Yeah. So, say, I mean, this is all elementary reference,
Right. No,
but,
that's fine. You know, you're basing this on your past experiences.
Yeah.
So this is.
Yeah. So, like in second grade, they learn different methods of solving problems and algorithms. So, you know, they might use a split method, and they'll work, you know, for about 2 weeks on that, and then they'll move on to regrouping. So with my kids, a lot of times we'll spend a lot of time working on within one unit on one specific skill, and then when we move on to the next one, that one starts to kind of get lost. So I like to revisit, you know, the split method in working on that whenever we're still working on new things, because they're tested over all of it.
Right.
And it's a skill that we want them to learn, and it's aligned with the TEKS. So I like to revisit different parts of the TEKS within the time that I work with them.
You know, and that's one thing here, you know, at the high school level for all of our students is trying to get with our students to understand that, you know, it's a cumulative type course.
Right.
You know, what you learn the first semester, you know, that's going to carry over into that second semester.
Right.
And so, you know, we're trying to find teachers and educators who, you know, can help, you know, kind of solidify that within our students. And know, like, okay, just because I learned it today doesn't mean I have to forget it for tomorrow.
Right.
So, you know, that's definitely one thing that we always want to continue to work with, just for all of us, administrators, teachers, you know, just helping them to be able to use what they learned day one and take them to carry that over to the end of the school year. So that's awesome. So, you know, obviously, student success is pretty much based on assessments. And obviously we have different assessments here. We have homework, it could be quizzes, it could be tests, it could be projects, it could be speeches. What is your general philosophy about homework, late work, grading, reteaching, and retesting?
I mean, I think it's all great. You know, homework definitely promotes, you know, carryover outside of the classroom and seeing can they do this on their own. Have they retained the information to you know, work these things out without basically any guidance, at least from the teacher, and it kind of holds them accountable too for their learning. So I mean, I think homework's great. What else was it? Homework and
late work.
Late work. See, that's hard because we do have accommodations for
Right.
that. Again, they're high school level. I mean, they've got to be held accountable for what they do. The accommodations kind of fluctuate with that. You know, you might have extra time or like an extra day to complete an assignment, but I think they should be held accountable. Absolutely. That is a life skill that you need to have even in the workforce, is to be able to turn things in on time, you know, stay up to date with stuff. So I think that's kind of my philosophy on late work.
And so, so those students who do have the accommodations, let's say they get an extra day, but they don't even want to turn in that day.
Yeah.
They want to push it off, or you know, they don't want to do it. Now, how do you kind of work with that?
I mean, I make sure they're very aware that, you know, this is your accommodation and this is kind of the extra help you get, but there's still a hard deadline. And it's based off of their actual general education teacher on their policies, and I follow through whatever they have, because again, in a job you're gonna work for different people who require different things. So I kind of follow what the general education teacher has, adapt what we need to with that person, and then with the students. And I make sure they're very aware, and that, it's still, if it's a hard deadline, then it's a hard deadline.
Right, okay. So what about just grading? Grading,
again, I really try to stick with the general education teacher on that, and I follow their rubric as best I can. Typically, accommodations and modifications won't necessarily affect the grading rubric. With English, it's a little bit different. Like, I know some of my dyslexia kids, they might not have get counted off for spelling errors or things like that, or we'll have, this is elementary. They have like a frequently misspelled word list, or things like that with them. So I really, really try to work with the general education teacher to come up with kind of a common ground, because it is essentially their course. So I try to tailor it as equally as I tailor it to the student. I try to tailor it to the general education teacher and kind of follow their guidelines for that.
Awesome. All right. Now, what is your philosophy about, we're talking about homework, late work, grading. What is your philosophy about posting assignments on your teacher webpage, family access, versus students writing their assignments just in their agenda book?
Yeah, I'm a big fan of both. I'm the type of person where I have to write everything down. So I'm definitely, and it keeps them engaged. When you're talking about what their assignment is in class, you want them to be paying attention. So when they're writing it down, at least okay, they've got one modality going, they're writing it down. So that should kind of be that first initial stick in their head. They're hearing it, they're writing it down. But I think it's also great to post it on your teacher website and online, if you use Canvas or Blackboard or however you use it, because there are parents that stay on top of it and really want to check in on their child's progress and stay up to date with things. So I think it's great. I think it's just another avenue that holds the students accountable. So I'm a fan of both. Again, I think it'll engage them in the classroom, and also you kind of have another thing in the back of your head to remind you of this.
So I don't know if are you familiar with It's Learning platform? So that's what we use here at Memorial High School. And essentially that's a learning platform that every teacher uses here. And essentially what that is for each teacher, they post their schedule, their whole schedule they post.
Like their conference times?
They post their conference times. They can post, they have a little bio of like their schedule. They post, the dates for their quizzes, dates for tests, dates for, what projects are due. And what this does is, and you can get an app on the phone, so we all know the kids are all addicted to their phones. And they can essentially get alerts. As long as they have the app, they can get alerts like, hey, we have an English test tomorrow. And also what this does is this helps with our parents as well, because before we had the It's Learning platform, these different teachers would have these different websites, Google Classroom. Some teachers didn't use any websites or anything at all. It was just a pure handwritten copy, or they just wrote it on the board, expected the students to write it down and kind of memorize it. So we get a lot of teachers would be getting emails about, this class has, when are the tests for this class, especially like when the students would get schedule changes and stuff like that. So this is kind of a one-stop shop for us. And so
so every teacher
every teacher, and for co-teach, essentially you would be linked in with with the gen ed classroom teacher, so
Okay.
you could essentially see
Mhm.
what's
What's happening?
happening in both of them, and then the
Okay.
parents can kind of respond. Like there's like a messaging
Mhm.
component to it, so that the parents can message you,
Oh.
students can message you as well. So that's kind of how we use it here at Memorial High School. So
Okay,
I
awesome.
think it's been very beneficial for us for the past few years. So.
Yeah. Awesome.
And so we talk about different assignments and getting the different students to kind of engage and learn, and working with the special ed students. What are the essential components of an effective classroom management plan for you, at least?
So, in my experience, we spend a lot of time. I mean, I was in kindergarten,
Yeah.
so we spend.
Yeah. That can be an adventure.
It was, and so it was like for kindergarten it was a little longer, but for the rest of the school it's about the first 2 weeks just going over routines, schedules, what's expected, getting kids acclimated to being at school, especially the kindergarten kids. So I think having set expectations and kind of setting up that environment from the start is, it's crucial. So those kids, they know what's expected of them, they know what they need to do every day. A lot of my special ed kids, I worked with a lot of kids on the autism spectrum, and they thrive on routines.
Right.
So having that routine in place and just making it a comfortable environment for them, I think is really beneficial for behavior management, those kinds of things within the classroom.
Okay. So you're talking about setting a schedule routine, and I think that's very important for our students to do that. So first day of class, your students are meeting you, Miss Abrams. What is Miss Abrams' expectations for her students?
Yeah. So again, it's a little tricky with co-teach. Typically, whenever I would go into the general education class, the general education teacher would I'd give her some time to introduce herself and set up her guidelines and kind of give an overview of the class, and then typically they would introduce me, and I would get up there and kind of introduce myself, and I made it a point, at least in elementary school, and like I said, I don't know how much different it is in high school, but I made it a point that I am accessible to all students. My job is to service the ones in that class, but I think it was important that I didn't single anyone out, say,
Right.
I'm here to help this kid, and this kid. I think as the kids started to get to know each other, it became more evident of, who's needing the extra help, who's
Right.
needing my help more.
Right.
But, the kids, even at the end of the year, some of them were like, oh, she just comes in here and helps during math and during reading, or, those kinds of things. So I made it a point that, I am a resource to everyone in the classroom. And I just tell them kind of what my role is. I'm here to kind of help whoever's struggling. I know all the content that this teacher knows too, and I'm here to kind of be an extra set of hands to help you guys. If you're struggling or if you have questions or things like that, I'll be pulling groups too. At least that's how we did in elementary school.
Right.
So I would even pull kids that weren't my group, because one, it kind of helped the general education teacher out, and I would still pull my kids with it, but it kind of got my kids, mingling and learning off of other kids at different, levels, instructional levels. So it kind of created a really good atmosphere within our class, as far as, a day-to-day
Right.
sense goes.
Good.
Yeah.
And that's something that we obviously we want to promote. We want to, we don't just want to just label students as just special ed and like that. This is their little block. That's
Right.
their little group. We want them. We put them in a gen ed classroom. We want them to be included. Obviously, the inclusive classroom, and talking about getting groups together with students who who may be on a caseload, letting them work with students who are just kind of in that gen ed classroom. I think it's going to be just so beneficial for those students, just socially, but also just academically, that they kind of learn and kind of pull things from each other. So, you're talking a lot about working collaboratively with the gen ed students and the special ed students, and you've kind of touched upon just through my notes here. You touched upon working with the gen ed teacher, figuring out their expectations. How would you want to work collaboratively with the gen ed teacher? I guess
so kind of ways I've done that in the past is, as far as elementary school goes, it's kind of by block of grade. All the third grade teachers have their planning at the same time.
Right. And we try to do that too with all of our gen ed classes. Is we're trying to get, we'll say English 1, we try to get them all second period conference so they can kind of work together. So.
So it's a little difficult because I had 3 grade levels and I couldn't take 3 conference times.
Right.
So I would kind of flip my schedule every now and then to where I would have my conference during 3rd grade's conference. So I would go in and help plan with them. That way, one, I know what's going on. I know, what they're teaching, what's things that are coming up, and then also I can kind of give my input as they're making their lesson plans to say, hey, I think this would be a really good idea to kind of modify, or one modification you can make to this lesson plan for my kids that need that extra help, or here's a way to make it more inclusive for my kids and your kids. They're all their kids, but but those different sets of learning styles and ability and things like that, learning levels, I should say. So that's kind of how we work collaboratively. Also, we use Eduphoria for our lesson plans, and so I'm on all of my teachers' lesson plans, so I have access to those, so I can review, if I want to know what's going on in this class for the week, or this grade level, I have access to all of their lesson plans too.
Okay, and you mentioned Eduphoria again. That's kind of like what our It's Learning is.
Okay.
So that's where the teachers can post their lesson plans, notes. The TEKS that's covering, and sort of other resources that that may be needed in the classroom. So okay, so you're working with students. We all get these. We get especially here at this level. And I'm pretty sure it's for all kids, all children. What would you do if a student challenges your authority in the classroom?
Oh gosh. I think at this level, it's nothing you really want to get into a power struggle with, especially with an audience.
Yeah.
Because then it just kind of, fuels the fire. So I think with me, it's good to kind of dismiss it in the moment. But I think it's very important to, talk to that student one-on-one and kind of discuss, what's going on, and still set up those expectations and guidelines, because you want a classroom that's going to be cohesive and, everyone kind of is after one common goal and we're all on the same page. So, I never want to call anyone out, that's not my job. My job isn't to argue or to call anyone out or, to hurt any feelings, I guess. But, so that's kind of, in the moment, I wouldn't necessarily address it fully. I'd want to do that, in private with the student, and because you never know. They could have just had a really bad day, or something's going on at home, or something like that. You never really know. So, but I think talking to them one-on-one, and I would hope that early on in the year I would have set up those expectations as a kind of preventative, and that wouldn't happen. But of course, things happen. You might have flat tire on the way to school. You never know, or some of you are running late and you're just having a crummy day. So,
Right.
and I get that, and I hope to have that relationship with the students that, even if they're having a bad day, if I talk to them one-on-one, say, hey, what's going on? Is something going on? And kind of hashing that out just individually, one-on-one, then I'm hoping we would have that kind of relationship where we can kind of work through that.
Now, if that's all, and that's great. I think just speaking with the student first.
Right.
You don't want to just assume.
Right.
The student's just bad. Like you
Exactly.
said, they can have bad days. You've had bad days. I've had bad days, and it's just one of those things that happen. But if you get something that continues to happen day after day, now what would your next step be in regard like contacting parents, speaking with the administration, or what?
Yeah. I think getting a more collaborative look at what's going on would be beneficial.
Okay.
I think it also depends on the relationship that I have with the parents.
Okay.
Especially if it's someone on my caseload, I try, like I make a solid effort to, contact my parents upon, at the beginning of the school year, say, hey, I'm the case manager. If you have any questions about, specific things that I can answer, I am here. This is my contact information.
Right.
I try to set that relationship up with the parents, and like I said, giving them a call on like, hey, we did really great this week, or
Right.
those highs too, and not just the lows.
Right.
So I think I would want to get kind of a collaborative look, meaning talking to other teachers that student may have and saying, hey, are you seeing this in your classroom? And if so, I don't want to contact the parents right off and say this is happening, and because it could just be across the board. It could just be they really don't like math and this is hard for them, you know what I mean? So I try to get a more collaborative look. Of course, talk to the student first, kind of talk to some teachers. If it got out of hand, I would always contact administration. I try to solve problems in-house first before contacting administration or contacting parents. But I think that you guys would be my next step, and I would ask for your guidance on, hey, do you think I should contact the parents? This is kind of what I've been seeing. I think it's important to kind of keep people in the loop and things like that. So that's kind of, I guess, my approach on that.
That's awesome. Thank you. So we've talked about in classroom working with the students, working collaboratively with teachers, other special ed teachers. What will you do to continue to develop professionally?
I think just kind of focusing, professional development, trainings and hours. I think it's important to build on the special education side. Differentiating instructions, different supports that you can use. I think IEP writing is great because a lot of this stuff, is kind of is on public display a lot of times.
Okay.
So really enhancing, my documentation and writing and things like that. But I think it's also important to even participate in general ed professional developments, because if I'm teaching math, I want to know the strategies for teaching math.
Okay.
As far as just special ed professional development goes, we don't really dive into those subjects. We just kind of talk about it on a broad sense of how are you going to individualize each subject. So I think doing that, and on top of that, kind of diving into the content areas that I'm with, I think would be beneficial as far as professional development goes.
Awesome. Okay. You've worked in a lot of different settings. You've worked in in life skills as a paraprofessional. You've worked as a substitute in KDSD. You've been a co-teach in KDSD. You've also worked in a pediatric therapy, speech therapy. Obviously you worked with a lot of different people.
Right.
How would your coworkers describe you? When I call and ask, I have Ashley Abrams here who's applying for this job. How would they describe you?
I think they would describe me as, someone who is approachable, dependable. I work well on a team. There's a lot of times where, because we're kind of all over the place, and especially in elementary school, there's some times where one special education teacher is in an IEP meeting and it goes over, and I have to kind of cover her spot or his spot and kind of work with those kids. So I think I'm very reliable in that sense, that they know that I've developed relationships, with all the teachers at the school, and really try to build rapport with all of the kids, especially all of the special ed kids. So, I'm very dependable when they need my help with that. And I think also, it goes a lot with report writing. When I first started, my mentor teacher would kind of read over most of my stuff and make sure it was good and stuff. And then we quickly, it was probably like after my second or third art, she kind of let me go on my own, and she knew that she could count on me to get my paperwork in on time and have it set and ready to go, and had the copies printed that I needed, and kind of have everyone set up to do those sort of things. And as far as going into different classrooms, I worked with 7 teachers.
Oh, wow.
Because I went into every 3rd grade classroom,
Yeah.
and I went into multiple kindergarten and multiple 2nd grade classrooms. So I worked with a lot of teachers, and then I go into specialists too. So PE, art, and music, I work with those teachers. And I just developed good relationships with those teachers. I always kept them in the loop. I always asked questions. I always asked how I could help them, and just developing those relationships with my coworkers. I work really well in a team, and I love talking to people and interacting. This is kind of a reason why I went the education route, was because I wanted more interaction with my coworkers and things like that, and just more people to interact with. So I think that's kind of how they would describe me.
Yeah, awesome. So so here, we need our teachers to be interactive with other teachers. Someone in your position, you need to be working with the gen ed teachers. You also need to be working with the special ed teams. So just you've mentioned about you work well with the team, and you've given some examples that definitely kind of reassures me that you can do that. You mentioned about working with the gen ed teachers. Can you just kind of briefly explain on how you work collaboratively, and if you want to give an example from a previous experience of how you work with the other special ed teachers?
Yeah, we always go to trainings together that are required within our district, for professional development days and things like that. So I think we do work a lot, especially report writing. We're always bouncing ideas off of each other, and we'll develop goals together and kind of assess progress and things like that. And a lot of times we'll even switch. I'll say, I'm having a really hard time getting this student to kind of get this concept down. Do you want to take them during tutorials, and I will go see your kids? And we kind of, it kind of keeps things fresh and gives a fresh perspective on different things. So we try to always talk and keep in constant communication about how our kids are doing and how other kids are doing, definitely bouncing ideas back off of each other.
Awesome. Well, those are the last of my questions.
Okay.
I appreciate you sitting down. It was great to listen to you, kind of hear your feedback on the different questions, and I just want to kind of give you time to ask me any sort of questions about the school itself, you know,
Mhm.
the position or anything like that.
Yeah.
I don't know if you have anything prepared. Or if
Yes,
you
I
have
did. I
anything-
wrote some down. I
Okay,
always have to
awesome.
write things down.
Awesome.
I did want to know how many teachers you have in the special ed department.
So in the special ed department, we have about 20,
Okay.
20 teachers. They kind of work in kind of different umbrellas in special ed. You know, we have our AIMS teachers, we have our life skills, and we have our co-teach as well.
Okay.
So,
And so, because I know this is, I think the job posting just said co-teach.
Yeah.
So, are there specific subjects for this position?
right. Yeah. So the position that you're applying, interviewing for us is going to be you're going to have about you're going to be co-teaching with social studies
Okay.
and English.
Okay. Social studies. And do you know how many kids are typically on a caseload?
So generally, I mean, obviously we like to divide them up as evenly as we can. General rule of thumb is probably roughly 15 to 20. Obviously,
Okay.
that can fluctuate depending on class size and different sort of things.
And how many kids do y'all have at Memorial?
So Memorial, we have just over 2,600 kids.
Oh wow.
Yeah.
Okay. And then, okay. So earlier we were kind of talking about, grades and those
Mhm.
kinds of things. Do you guys have a certain policy for retesting?
Oh, retesting, yeah. So here at Memorial High School, any student can retest that failed the test.
Okay.
So
So
if you failed, you can retest. Now, once you retest, then the district policy is you can't get higher than a 70.
Oh, okay. Yeah.
So
Yeah,
let's say
that's how ours is.
so let's say John took an English test. He failed it with a 63. He retests and he ends up getting an 80. We obviously can't give him an 80. The highest he gets is 70.
Okay.
So if you get a 70 or above on that initial test, it's not like you can try to rate that up to an 80 somehow.
Right.
So
Okay.
yes, you can only retest if you
Yeah, that's
if
kind
you-
of how ours is.
if you fail, and so you get to that passing grade,
Okay.
and our policy is only for tests, so we don't re-quiz.
Oh, got it. Okay.
So-
So just tests. Perfect. All right. I don't think I had any more questions for you guys. I guess just what's the next step in the interview
Yeah,
process?
so the next step, so I'm gonna go ahead, I'm gonna speak with our special ed department chair, which I know you've already talked to her.
Mhm.
So we're gonna kind of sit down and just kind of bounce some things off each other, and and once we kind of make a decision, we will give you a call, and if we feel like you're the best candidate, we'll offer you this job, and
Okay.
you give us a yes or no. If you say yes, then we will push everything through HR, and
Okay.
we'll
So I would hear from HR.
yeah. So
Okay.
you'll hear from us first.
Okay.
Within this week,
Mhm.
you'll hear from us. We're gonna try to get this done as quickly, as we can.
Mhm.
And as soon as you give us that yes, we will pass that along to HR,
Okay.
and then they will contact you about coming in, giving you some information, giving you a contract, giving you dates for specific new teacher training, stuff like that, and get
Okay.
you a laptop and some different sorts of things.
Perfect.
So,
Awesome.
is there anything else that I can answer for you that maybe I didn't talk about?
No, I think that's it.
Awesome.
Yeah, I mean, thank you so much
Yeah,
for
so
your
thank
time.
you so much for taking time, applying, and
Yeah.
interviewing, and thank you for just
Yeah, it was
being here
great.
and answering questions. Thank you so
Yeah,
much.
Thank
Appreciate it.
you. Yeah, you have a
Appreciate
good
it.
one.